Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Innovation Journal Club. My name is Paul Singh. I'm an anterior segment and glaucoma surgeon out in southeastern Wisconsin. Again, just remind everybody, this program, IJC, is basically trying to take podium presentations, publications from here and the OUS, but bring it back to our practices. What do all these publications mean to us and how we take care of our patients? And today we're going to talk about another topic which I know a lot of us love is premium IOLs. We'll talk specifically about small aperture lenses, and to kind of help us navigate through premium IOLs and small aperture, I have a really good friend, the master himself, Carl Stonecipher, down in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yeah.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, it's all good. And you and I have known each other for, I don't know, 20 years or so. We started out in high school together, I think it was.
I know, exactly. She still looks younger than I am. It's
I
crazy.
don't know about that, but.
But thanks for hanging out. I mean, I look to you because you always try new technologies and you're always on the cutting edge. And talk about just kind of where we're at now in premium IOLs and what are our expectations for ourselves and our patients.
Sure. So the study that we're going to look at today revolves around this new kind of lens series is small aperture lenses. And so I was in the original trials, and the original trials were basically, one eye was for monofocal or monofocal toric, and the other eye was for small aperture. And we're going to cover that a little bit, but also I'm going to kind of talk to them about more complex cases as well. So I'm like you, I'm a refractive surgeon. As you know, glaucoma is against my religion, so I don't do any glaucoma. But I think for the most part, I do cataract refractive. I've done somewhere around 42,000 cataracts and somewhere around 82,000 LASIK.
You're starting to get the hang of it.
Yeah,
good
I finally figured it out. And so the reason I bring that up is most of my practice are patients that are coming back and saying, hey man, you fixed me once, now fix me again, and I want to read.
Yeah.
So we're all trying to figure out a lens that works for the patient. So when I look at a lens and I look at lens populations, I don't want to do no harm, right? We don't want to create dysphotopsias. We don't want to have an angry patient. And realistically, I just presented a series at ESCRS of 3,513 cases, me, and it shows my enhancement rate is 1.08%. So I think when we talk about these category lenses, and first I'm going to kind of dive into the small aperture, and then you and I can talk about what we do in our practice. But I think for the most part, we don't want to pick the wrong lens for the wrong patient, or the right lens is always what we want to put in the right patient. Maybe we're not always right, and maybe we can kind of touch that up, later down the road, but I think it's the first thing that we think about.
I love that idea because I think the point is there's a lot of options for patients that could work, but we don't want to pick one option that's going to make it worse. So that's a really good point that you made as well. So let's talk about kind of this new concept of small aperture. So I'm going to let you kind of drive this as more, but talk about kind of where it came from, and kind of then talk about what it's supposed to do, and then we'll talk about the study as well.
Yeah, a lot of different people have been talking about small aperture, and we know small aperture optics, depth of field, depth of focus. Depth of focus is I want to be able to see it at all ranges, where with a monofocal type of lens, I don't get that. In the study, you had a monofocal toric, and you had this lens, so it extended that depth of focus and that depth of field, which are both camera terms. So small optics has been in cameras forever. And then of course small optics in our telescopes and small optics in a lot of other things that we do on a day-to-day basis. Jack Holliday has shown a lot of the different ways in which we can use this small optics, but you use it every day, right? As a pinhole. Your technician uses it as a pinhole. So
it's a great way to show patients this is what this lens can do for you.
Yeah, and we do that. And so I think what this study showed is we get 20/20 distance, 20/25 intermediate, 20/30 at near. So the one thing that I want to be clear about is this lens masks astigmatism. So when you refract these patients postoperatively, you may still pick up some astigmatism because it's not treating the astigmatism per se like you have with a typical toric lens, but it's kind of masking that astigmatism. So we all know the small optic aperture and how it works, but the design of this study, for me, that I'm talking about today, is monofocal toric in one eye. The other eye had the small aperture lens. Now, by design, the protocol was basically what? Dominant eye got the monofocal toric, non-dominant eye got the small aperture. And you can argue, hey, what do I do in an accountant? Or hey, what do I do in a seamstress? If they're, use their dominant eye more for near and those kind of things. But the second series of the study was I put a small aperture lens in the worst eye, okay, the one that had the highest higher-order aberrations. And in the second group, we had RK, and we had post-LASIK, and we had keratoconus, and we had post-hexagonal RK. We had every type of person that comes to you and says, man, this didn't work for me. Can you do something now to get me by? I let them do their worst eye first, and then I said to them, what do you think? And they did their second eye. They had a choice. Everyone, it really surprised me, everyone chose having the small aperture optics
In
in
the
the
other
second
eye.
eye, except one person who has 20/20 vision in the other eye and doesn't really need surgery.
Sure.
So the moral of the story is, a lot of people talk about diminution in vision and how it decreases contrast sensitivity. We really didn't see that. I have yet to explant one of these lenses, but again, it goes back that I don't want you to think of, oh gosh, I'm going to do bilateral in everybody. So I'm not singing that song and I'm not giving that message, but I think there's a lot of these patients that we can show great results.
Sure.
And so it's a world that is what? Our cell phones, our iPads, and that's not that tiny 20/20 vision. So if you go back and look at our little eye charts that we all have on our counters, 20/40, 20/30 vision, they're happy. So if I can attain 20/30 at near, these people are functional.
Yeah.
The worst of the case series that I can tell you is, I never did it. Did you ever do hexagonal keratotomy?
I did not.
Yeah.
I actually never did RK. That was my dad's. But I see all my dad's patients.
Yeah.
So
So hexagonal keratotomy, she was done elsewhere. She basically comes in, she had 6 diopters, hyperopic, spherical equivalent, and she had 5 diopters and 6 diopters of astigmatism in both eyes. So she came in, we operated on her, and now she's 20/30 at distance, 20/30 intermediate, 20/30 at near. Where before...
and because of that cornea, she's getting a lot of depth of focus too.
And that's the whole point. With this small aperture lens, the other bonus in these RK type patients who do have fluctuation in their vision because their cornea is changing throughout the day, the lens can change with them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the important points that I want to make in terms of the big picture is the results are good. Walk, don't run, crawl, even if you want to say that. Don't feel like you got to go do every bad patient. But I think this is a new tool for our toolbox. I'm not going to say it's for everybody, but I think there's a lot of patients in your practice that it'll work exceptionally well for. The pellucid marginal degeneration patients, I think, still do better with a toric. And so just a standard toric, because you can define an axis.
Sure.
We were talking with Eric Donneveld and Marguerite McDonald and Mark Lobanoff last night about, okay, if they have a regular astigmatism, could you put this lens in them? Absolutely, because it's just masking the irregularity.
You don't have to worry about the axis, et cetera. Even patients who have ocular surface disease, you're not sure about the measurements. I mean, it gives you much more flexibility as well. I also think, too, what I'm surprised at putting these in, I was used to worry about the centration being absolutely perfect. It's fairly forgiving.
It's very forgiving.
I was surprised with that. I really thought if I wasn't perfectly centered, I'd be screwed. And I've had a couple of people who were decently centered, but not perfect, and they're happy.
Yeah, and I think, when we go to look at these lenses, we got to talk about a couple things. Biometry, still same rules. Treat dry eye, get them cleaned up, do your biometry, but targeting is about minus 0.75 for me. So in all these patients, I target about minus 0.75, and I think that's the sweet spot that we found in the study, and I would highly recommend that. The same thing goes, still figure out your A constants or Hagus constants or whatever you do to try and perfect it, but a lot of these tougher corneas are harder to predict anyway. I have not yet enhanced anybody. I've been doing these lenses in the US since January. I've been doing the lenses outside, in a study for about 3 years now, and we still haven't enhanced anybody. We have 2 people, both engineer types, but they basically, say their vision's a little bit dim, which accounts for about 3% of the population, what we saw in the study, but neither of them have asked to have their lens removed, and one of them really probably could use an enhancement. I put him on the schedule 5 times, said I'd do it for free, and he still hasn't showed up.
I think it's a good question about the dimming. So, curious, we're going to go into your, kind of bilateral versus kind of only one eye. I found that even when I use the topical drops for, presbyopia, like you did at the time, when I put in one eye, it was like, whoa, I really noticed a difference. When I had it in both eyes, I didn't notice it. Do you notice that there's any difference potentially if you have a bilateral implantation of, the IC8 or the F-Thera versus one eye, you'd have less potential for the patient to notice dimming?
Yeah,
if they would?
I think that, the royal salute that we get every day is real, and you just tell them don't do that. No, I'm kidding. But I'm just saying that I have not really seen anybody bothered by that. You kind of, the sweet spot is what? Pick a person who's already monovision.
Yeah, well, that's perfect.
And so I'm monovision after the LASIK, so I've got a dead zone, right? And this is increasing that depth of focus where you don't have a dead zone.
There's so many options. We have light adjustable lenses. We have, obviously torics. We have multifocals. We have EDOFs. So how do you pick? Do you look at what they want and then see how their cornea looks, or do you say, here's my gonna go to? Talk about that.
For me, because a lot of these patients, probably 8 out of 10 patients that I see are post-something, post-refractive, post-RK, in the sense of, irregularities. I've got other irregularities of their cornea, because that's kind of where my practice has gone to. I've got a partner, that does a lot of the plain Jane stuff and says, hey, you do the weird stuff and I'll do the plain Jane stuff. And that's kind of my DNA, so I don't mind that at all. But I think that, so I'm very basic. And one of the lessons I've learned, and I'm old and experience means you've done it wrong, is a patient comes to you and they want you to pick a lens for them. So I have learned that you have to look at that patient and say, this is what I want to do. If you're my mother, my brother, my father, my sister, this is what I'm going to put in you. And I've operated on a lot of my family. And so I think that, you know, when you look at that and say, okay, now that's what that's going to cost. I don't have that discussion. My person does that, Miranda does that, and others do that. And basically, then that's where the finances come in. Now, if they say, I can't really afford that, then we'll talk about other lenses. So I usually give two choices to the patient. One that's what I want, and one that may be, you know, a generic or more generic, but I'm using typically the Rayner lens. So if they have less than, you know, 0.75 diopters of astigmatism, and soon we're going to come with the Rayner toric. If it's a toric, I'm using the Technis toric or the iHance toric, because that's giving me that little bit of more near, and Aspire just came out. So
my first case on Wednesday, actually.
Yeah, so
exactly.
Eric was talking that he was really happy last night. I think he's done like 20 or 30 cases and said it's really a nice lens, and it adds to that depth of focus that we hope. So maybe, you know, you could put a B&L lens like an Aspire with the small aperture, or maybe you could put a Rayner with the small aperture. The only thing about the small aperture versus, say, a Rayner lens or something, you know, there are differing technologies, but you and I mix and match every day. And so I think that, you know, are they going to notice Royal Salute more? No, I don't. I still use trifocals, but they have to have perfect corneas. So Synergy, Panoptics, I think they're great lenses. And then, of course, Avidity is probably what I'm using, you know, in a large majority of my practice, because I find that's a very forgiving, extended depth of focus lens.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that there are all the options, like you said, are all on the table. I think light adjustable lens is also something I've used a lot too recently, just because of glaucoma and dry eye and, you know, the quality of vision, I think, from that, and having the ability to adjust afterwards. Patients love that, the idea that, hey, you know, I can adjust and tailor it to you after it's in your eye to figure things out. I would tell patients, look, guess what? We have great measurements, we have great tools, we're all up to date. But even with those measurements and tools, there are some people where the lens sits in a different position and we are not quite 100%. I can try and get closer to that if we can with this adjustments. And they kind of like that idea of having an adjustment. They almost like, oh yeah, I love that idea. But I think there's some patients where it does not take care of HOA, right? And so that's where I think the LAL is great for those patients who, let's say, have glaucoma, maybe you have, you know, astigmatism that's kind of consistent and regular. But if you have those irregular areas, RK patients, strange corneas, kind of peripheral kind of irregularity, I think the IC8 or the F-Thera lens makes some more sense. And that's kind of how I'm doing it. So those post-RK patients. But the other thing is too, even in patients where from a cost issue, to your point, a monofocal standard lens in one eye and the F-Thera in the other eye, targeting minus a half or 0.75, gives them a really good range of vision. And the cost is lower than having both eyes done with a premium IOL. So for some people who can't afford both lenses, both eyes, that's been helpful. Have you thought about that too?
Yeah, we do it all
the
time. So literally we've done that. And so, I mean, you know, you'll laugh. There's two things I'm doing now. So there's always that daughter or son that comes with the patient, and they kind of allude, Mom, why would you want to spend my money on your eyes? And I'm thinking, wait, what did she just say? You know, she's basically thinking, well, Mom, you're old, you don't need this. And I say, no, you do need it, because there's a great study out of Canada that was just recently presented at ASCRS, and it shows that if patients have these styles of lenses, these extended depth of focus, whatever you want to say, lenses, that they have less falls. And I think that's very important, because my mom's 92. I don't want her falling, and then she's already fallen. So I think for the most part, when you think about the future, I say to them, hey, if it's kind of expensive, you don't need a new pair of tennis shoes. Go start a GoFundMe page and let them do that.
That's such a common topic that I hear all the time. And I kind of fight that with myself and my staff even. You know, it's not up to us to decide if something is worth it for the patient. Our job is not to say, how much can you afford? Our job is to say, this is what this can do for you. This is what I believe personally. And your job as a patient is to figure out, is that worth it to you based upon the information I've given you as well? And I think we have to get away from this whole thing, oh, it's too expensive for a patient, we shouldn't be charging too much, etc. Look, at the end of the day, here's what it is, and here's what the value is for you, and you decide as a patient. I think that's the key as well. The value add, we decide, sorry to pontificate, but think about how much we decide every day to day, whether it's a Starbucks coffee versus a Dunkin' Donuts coffee, an Acer computer versus an Apple, that's $2,000 more, a Louis Vuitton purse versus a Coach purse. We are deciding these things, and we're placing value. Is it worth that purchase? So for me, my job, and the way I look at it, is my job is to educate patients, to give them enough information and my recommendation, and they then can take that information and make an informed decision. Is it worth it to me, to your point? Because people pay for different things in their lifetime, depending on what they think the value is.
And great minds think alike. You and I have always kind of done the same stuff. And our job is to pick something. Like I said, to bring it full circle, you want to pick something for the lens based on your experience. That's why they come to see you in the first place. So you don't have to say every type of lens there is out there. You don't have to explain all the different lenses to them. Pick one for them, or pick two if you want to do a premium and maybe a more generic kind of option. But then after that, your job and my job is to make sure they understand what that lens can do for them, because you don't want to give them, too high of expectations. You want to say what that lens can possibly, have negative, whether it's a dysphotopsia, positive or negative. But you never want a patient to come back post-op and say, Paul, if you'd only told me, I would have gone and gotten that other lens. If you'd only made it more clear to me. And we use animations. We do a lot of stuff that you do in the office, and I think that helps.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We can talk. I can talk forever.
Yes.
You're amazing. But thank you for all this information. I hope this helped you, everybody out there. There's so many options. I don't think there's any one right or wrong, but I think it's how we approach it. And if you think about kind of what the patient wants and what's the best chance of getting to that outcome that you want, there's different options. And I think this is another option we have at our disposal. Please stay tuned for another episode of Innovation Journal Club. Hopefully we'll have something coming your way soon as well. Take care, everybody.